Hi, folks. Good morning. We want to welcome you to the class on the American legal system. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm Dennis Curran. Those of you who are in front of me who are members of this class know who I am. I'm a professor of the practice in the political science department. Before my appointment at Tufts, I was a trial lawyer in Boston for 23 years and served 15 years on the bench in the Massachusetts trial court. I'm delighted to have two relatively recent Tufts graduates with us here as guest speakers this morning. I've known each of them since they were sophomores here at Tufts and have followed their academic and professional careers with great interest. I'll leave it to them to tell you the story of how we first came to know one another. They joined other distinguished guests in our two classes, the American Legal System course and the Constitutional Law course, all within the past several weeks. Our guests have included two Chief Justices of State Supreme Courts, a Massachusetts Appeals Court Justice, a prominent Massachusetts trial attorney, two civil rights lawyers, a former Department of Justice trial attorney, a prominent rising star voted as a super lawyer, young lawyer, a trial lawyer here in Boston, and finally an officer in the Hispanic Bar Association who worked for the Department of Corrections and represented the department in handling sexually dangerous persons cases. Now, each of those speakers has afforded us a behind-the-scenes perspective on how the courts really work, as well as their take on the legal profession. After today, we'll have two more guest speakers for our American Legal System course lined up. Next Tuesday, December 1st, we'll feature Justice Shannon Friesen of the Massachusetts Superior Court as a friend and a former colleague. She's the president of the Black Lawyers Association. Her talk is entitled My Perspective, and she will be talking about racial disparity in the courts. The following week, on December 8th, that's a Tuesday, we'll feature Judge Robert Zimian, who is a pioneer in the creation of drug diversion courts. He started the very first drug court here in Massachusetts, which has led to the creation of 80 similar courts in Massachusetts and in New England. As you may know, drug courts have demonstrated remarkable success in lowering the recidivism of high-risk, long-term drug abusers. Well, he'll tell you the success story of those courts, and he'll also offer you an inside view of the tremendous institutional opposition for the creation of those drug courts that he had to encounter in creating the very first drug court in Massachusetts. I welcome all of you here today who are both members of our own class as well as the constitutional law class. And I invite you to attend those presentations on Tuesday, December 1st and December 8th as well. If you're interested in attending, just email me. My email address is small case letter. I do not use the Tufts email system. It's too, to be honest with you, it's too cumbersome, two security checks, and then all sorts of administrative blocks. So just email me. I use my personal email. I promptly answer any email that is sent to me. The email address, for those of you who don't know, is small case letter J, DENNISCURRAN @gmail.com. It's small case letter J, DENNISCURRAN @gmail.com. It's just a quicker way of getting a hold of you. I will promptly get back to you with the bios of the future speakers and the times of their presentation. But this morning, we welcome and we're happy to have attorney Hannah Dayle Carlin, class of 15, Hannah, who went on to Boston University Law School, where she achieved the distinction and honor of being managing editor of the Law Review. From there, she clerked for the Chief Justice of the Massachusetts Appeals Court and then went on to the federal system where she clerked for a justice of the First Circuit Court of Appeals. Last month, she was hired by a prestige firm in Washington, D.C. called Kellogg Hansen, which argues many, many cases before the United States Supreme Court. And also with us today is Morgan Peterson, also class of 15, who took a few years off after Tufts, worked at an excellent law firm called Rose Proscott. She is a native Californian, and she has returned to her first love and is now a third-year student, law student at the University of California at Irvine. She has already distinguished herself by participating in the writing of a certiorari petition to the United States Supreme Court while still a law student. I thought we would conduct this, even though it's just 6 of you in front of me. There's how many folks do we have behind us on the Zoom presentation? How are you guys doing? There are 28 folks behind you. So it's an informal presentation. I will ask our guests if they have the time to answer any and all questions that you may have. Any and all questions. So we've kind of divided it informally. It's not a formal presentation. We've divided it into 4 aspects. What was their Tufts experience like? How may that experience have influenced their chosen careers? How did they become interested in law to begin with? What's the application process for law school like? What is law school like? And finally, the different careers in the law that you may pursue. So with that as our backdrop, I will turn it over to Morgan and Hannah. And I will leave it up to you, Morgan, if you could throw Morgan and Hannah's countenances up on the screen. Is that possible?
Once they speak, they'll come
Okay, Hannah, Morgan.
Yeah, I'll let Morgan go.
We're here.
Great. And I need, I'm gonna kill the light. Do me a favor, kill the lights in the room. We're getting a glare on the, and did we lose Morgan? Did she go back to school?
No, I'm here.
Can we split screen on someone on the thing?
No, it'll just show.
Okay. So Morgan, I'll start it off with you. It's your show, your and Hannah's show. Lots of questions from the students this semester. And I'm a little long in the tooth in this. I'm a little bit far removed. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you all right. I might have to ask you to repeat something every now and then, but.
Silly thing, but not silly, but necessary things on, which impede us. If a student asks a question and you do not hear it, just go like this and we'll make sure that we can get the question to you properly, okay?
Sounds good.
Thank you for participating.
Of course, I'm excited to be here. Good morning, everybody. My name is Morgan Peterson. Like Judge said, I'm a graduate of Tufts University class of 2015, and I am now a 3rd-year law student at UC Irvine School of Law. And I took 3 years off between Tufts and law school to work as a paralegal at the Boston office of Proskauer Rose, which is a big law firm, if you're familiar with the term. And now that I'm getting ready to graduate, I will be returning to that same firm, to their Los Angeles office after graduation. But my path to becoming a law student and ultimately soon, hopefully, fingers crossed, a lawyer, kind of took a bunch of different turns. When I arrived at Tufts, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I took classes in probably every department, although maybe not the political science department actually, but I took computer science classes, I took anthropology classes, English classes, I tried philosophy. That was not for me. And ultimately my first internship was at an advertising agency in LA, and I hated it, to be honest. but slowly through another series of more law-related internships, starting with an internship for a state senator at the Massachusetts State House, and then ultimately interning with Judge Curran for a period of almost 1.5 years, both during school and during the summers in the Massachusetts Superior Courthouse in a couple different counties. Hannah and I both followed him around to like maybe 3 counties. Ultimately made me realize that the law was where I saw my career heading. And I, I wanted to make sure though, before I took the plunge in going to law school is very financially costly and time consuming. And I wanted to, know I was sure. I had some uncertainty. And so that's why I took 3 years off to work as a paralegal in the private law firm setting, just to know that I could see myself practicing law. And that's kind of how it started. While I was at Tufts, I majored in anthropology and peace and justice studies, which the latter of which I don't think is even a major anymore, or I don't even know if it exists, honestly. But I was able to kind of utilize Tufts X College, the experimental college, to take classes taught by practicing attorneys. And I took a couple different classes through there that really were some of my most like favorite classes at Tufts, and was a good experience just getting an introduction into seeing not necessarily what law school would be like, but what legal practice is like. So I had a great time doing those. And is there anything else I'm supposed to cover in this first spiel?
Well, what did you do outside of academics at Tufts? What were your interests?
Um,
Do you remember? Was it that long ago?
was I honestly, I wasn't really involved in any clubs or anything. I definitely signed up for a bunch of clubs and became an official member of like none of them. But I've always been really passionate about staying active and getting outside. I love to hike and I love to ski, so I know I spent a lot of time enjoying the access to that New England nature and wilderness. Got to experience what skiing on the East Coast is like, which is very different from the West Coast, and it involves this thing called like ice, which is tough. But other than that, I spent a lot of my time outside the classroom when I wasn't with friends, interning in the courts. That was kind of my biggest extracurricular activity, if you could call it that, for that period of 1.5 years. And I interned for Judge Curran in the Superior Court in Middlesex County, which was in Woburn, in Suffolk County, which is Boston, and even briefly in Worcester County. And got to spend, the time I wasn't doing coursework doing these interesting projects for the judge. And that was great. And I also made some great friends doing that. So you guys are really lucky to be able to learn from him in the classroom. But yeah, that's about it.
Thank you. What do you remember? What did you remember most fondly about going to Tufts?
Oh my gosh. I would have to say, it's hard to like think of something, not just think of the friends I made and the good times we had. I loved my junior and senior year living off campus in a house on College Ave. And that was a really fun atmosphere to be in with, living with your best friends and being surrounded by interesting people who, everybody just has different backgrounds and interests. And it's really a time you don't get that again, unless maybe if you go to grad school and like live in a dorm or something. But it's when you're surrounded by so many people vaguely your age, who are just, you get to learn so much from other people. So I really enjoyed that. I have definitely some fond memories of things like snow days and all the quintessential New England activities, apple picking, that kind of stuff. I know that's not exactly like an academic school memory, but I really enjoyed just those smaller moments of getting to, live in a beautiful place surrounded by interesting people. And I miss that for sure.
How about you, Hannah? Maybe go with Hannah?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. Good morning, everybody. So I guess my story starts where I am right now, actually. I grew up here in Maine, and then I attended a regional high school before I went to Tufts. And like Morgan, I graduated in 2015. I also double majored. I did psych and political science, both of which are still majors as far as I know. Let's see what else. Oh, so I sort of since high school had an inkling that I wanted to go to law school. I did a mock trial program in DC for a week in the summer after my junior year, I think. And so I went into Tufts sort of with that in mind, which was great because then I knew it didn't really matter what I majored in as long as I did well. And I think that's important for law students to, or future law students to know that your major doesn't really matter. Doing well and working on things that you're interested in is more important. And especially, I think you've probably heard that if you're an engineering or a science major, that can actually be very attractive to law schools because then you can do, you can take the patent bar and you have more career options. Let's see. Oh, at Tufts, I was on the track team. So most of my memories are long bus rides with teammates, meets in faraway places. And like Morgan, I interned for Judge Curran for I think a year and a half and actually was able to do one of the semesters. It counted as a class and I just had to write a term paper at the end. So that's a really good option too if you're looking at course selection. And I'll jump onto Morgan's plug about the X College. I took a lot of classes from lawyers or judges or retired judges and learned a ton there and started making connections that were helpful in exploring going to law school.
And how was it that you both came to the court to work with us? Do you remember? I don't remember how it.
Yeah, I do. So you or one of your current interns had sent an email to a woman named Stephanie Ripley, who was then in charge of the pre-law society at Tufts. And I was on their e-list and saw the post looking for interns to come work for you. And I said, that sounds great. Since I'm interested in going to law school anyway. I applied, came in and interviewed, and then it went from there.
It's exactly how I remember it.
Exactly how you remember it?
Yeah.
Was it a rigorous interview?
No.
I was nervous though, full suit, had to drive up to the courthouse. I think I was shaking in my boots.
Oh yeah, it was very intimidating, but looking back, it wasn't particularly rigorous. You were very nice to us.
It really wasn't. So tell us what exposure you had in the courtroom and to juries. And also I'd like you to share with them if you wrote any law review articles or participated in the writing. Right. Yeah.
We had oh yeah, Hannah, you want to take this?
Oh, sure. So we got to sit in on, I don't know how many trials, I'll say dozens, but probably more than that. And we got the unique opportunity to speak to the jurors after they had given their verdicts. And Judge Curran let us ask questions about their thought process. And just to really get that kind of insight into the minds of jurors is an experience that a lot of lawyers don't have, never mind undergraduate interns. So that was an absolutely incredible opportunity and something I still talk about in interviews to this day. If you tell a trial lawyer that you've spoken to juries after they've deliberated, that's all they want to talk about. They want to know absolutely everything you can gather. And so a lot of that work. So we also talked about the law review article that came out of jury work was this push for attorney conducted voir dire, which Judge Curran practiced in his courtroom anyway, where in paneling a jury, the judge would call the potential jurors up to sidebar and allow the lawyers to sort of have a free back and forth with them instead of this more strained conversation where the judge asks questions and the person is sort of nervous and evasive. And we just saw how much of a better practice that was and led to better, less biased, more interested jurors. And so we wrote about that and that was published in the Suffolk Law Review of Trial and Appellate Advocacy, I believe. And Morgan had some other publications too.
Yeah, you were both co-authors with me on that. And Morgan, what was your piece? In addition to the peer review piece in the Suffolk Law Journal.
So Judge and I also worked on a separate piece about juror education levels. We actually had two different ones that I'm going to bring up. One is about the juror education levels. In speaking with trial lawyers and also members of the jury after trials, we found that there was a real disconnect between how trial lawyers perceived members of the jury and how members of the jury felt that they were being perceived by the lawyers. Members of the jury often found that they were being spoken down to, like things were almost getting dumbed down too much for them, which is, of course, it's an important role of a lawyer to be able to convey important legal theories and terms in language that any non-legal person can understand. But that doesn't mean they need to act like they're speaking to kindergartners. All the jurors in Massachusetts are highly educated, very accomplished people. Just by the nature of being a Massachusetts citizen, we found people to be highly engaged, and they often felt that they were just kind of being spoken down to too much by the trial lawyers. And so we did a study looking at just purely at the educational backgrounds of the average juror in Massachusetts to hopefully provide the trial lawyers just with some context to what we were telling them about, jurors are telling us, oh, they feel spoken down to, but it was going to be easier to make that connection if the trial lawyers had some data in front of them. And of course, we wanted to recognize that education level is not necessarily indicative of one's intelligence or ability to grasp legal concepts during a trial and, play their important role as a juror. But it was just a way to provide some data to trial attorneys. And we found that just the average juror in Massachusetts, we looked at Middlesex County, which is kind of the suburban area north of Boston that Medford and Somerville are both in, just found that people are incredibly highly educated. And we were able to use this to show and to explain our point to trial lawyers that, you can ramp it up a bit. These jurors appreciate being spoken to like the competent, smart adults they are. And so that was one publication. The other tied into the voir dire usage, but I remember we specifically did some numbers crunching because there was some opposition to attorney directed voir dire in Massachusetts. There were members of the court who were kind of played in large administrative roles in the court system who believed that if attorneys were allowed to conduct individual voir dire, they would use more jurors because they would disqualify more people. And therefore, as a result, the state would have to call more potential jurors, and that would cost money and time. And what we did is we looked at the cases in which judge had utilized attorney-directed voir dire and how many jurors in total it took to fill that jury. How many were ultimately disqualified and didn't make it. To get that number. And we compared that to the average juror utilization is the term, the juror utilization in the courts of judges in other counties. And we're ultimately able to show that attorney-directed voir dire does not use more jurors and therefore doesn't require the courts to bring more people in to be potential jurors. And in fact, it actually uses fewer jurors. So I think that was an important thing we were able to show to the legislature when ultimately helping to advocate for the passage of the Massachusetts state law that allowed for attorneys to request attorney-directed voir dire in their trials.
And I will add as a coda that Hannah and Morgan's work, and I'm not understating this, but it's been told to me by many, many people, was the key factor in changing the legislature's mind about this issue. They had been very heavily lobbied by the judicial leaders against any change, which is not unusual. Change comes very, very slowly to the judicial system. But I will say that that piece of literature and the work that you folks produced resulted in a significant change in the law. It absolutely did. Let me, you spoke, Morgan, just picking up, applying not directly from law school. What do you think, the benefits of that, the disadvantages of that, please?
Absolutely. So when I entered college, I was burnt out from high school. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but I believe it's true. And by the end of 4 years at Tufts, while I loved the experience and just the academic exposure I had, I was really ready for a break from classes. I knew that I could not go straight into another few years of school. Also, I wanted to really make sure that this was the right decision for me before I made the leap and committed to 3 years and X amount of loans. As I mentioned, I'd had experience working in different areas of the law throughout some internships while I was at Tufts. So I worked in the state Senate for a summer, and I worked for judge and got to see the legal system operate from within the courts and the trial court specifically. I also did an externship for credit for my major with a nonprofit group in Boston, Massachusetts Advocates for Children, which did a combination of lobbying work and some legal work, and as well as community work for children of different underserved populations in the greater Boston area. And so I'd kind of seen these different areas of the law, but what I hadn't yet seen was private practice. And, at the time I was a fan of Suits, the TV show, and I really wanted to see what that big law experience was like. And if you're not familiar with that term, that's just a term used to describe like large law firms with hundreds of attorneys and a lot of offices. And they kind of traditionally have a reputation of being places where you go and you grind and you're working all the time, and it's a very corporate environment. And I was interested in that just because it was something I hadn't yet seen. And I decided specifically that, I wanted to kind of fill that void in my legal experience and apply to work as a paralegal at a large law firm in Boston. I wanted to stay in Boston. I loved Boston as a city. And so honestly, I just started Googling. I found firms' websites. I used Wikipedia. I used vault.com, which is, I don't even know how they would describe it, but it kind of aggregates corporate information for law firms and accounting firms and banks and stuff. And that was a good way to do some research and just find out who the big players in the Boston legal market were. And I started applying for paralegal jobs. I found that a lot of law firms, I had gone in with a conception that maybe I needed specific paralegal experience, whether it was like a paralegal certificate or degree or previous experience. And I found that to not be the case where I was applying. Many large law firms actually have programs where they take in graduates of, college graduates who are interested in going to law school but want to take some time off and get some work experience. And I ultimately found a firm purely by chance that was a great fit for me, Proskauer Rose, and I happened to get hired as a paralegal in their labor and employment group, which I didn't know at the time, but was a group, an area of law that they're very well known for. And I intended to take 2 years off just to get some work experience, save some money, spend some time, taking my time and applying for law school. And I ultimately stayed for 3 years because I loved working there. I really loved my job and I loved the firm. And I was kind of thriving finally outside of a academic environment and in like a working environment. And I just got really great exposure to the actual practice of law from the private large law firm setting. I worked on a lot of cases, 30, 40, who knows how many cases, varying from state cases, trial in the trial courts to cases in the federal district courts. I even worked on some appeals, and I worked on everything from single plaintiff discrimination actions in the employment setting to very large thousands of people class actions over wage and hour issues, one of which is a really interesting case involving 2,000 minor league baseball players who are suing the league and all the teams for wage and hour violations. And that case is still ongoing. The Supreme Court just decided to not hear the case. So it's entirely possible that a case I worked on as a paralegal, I will go back as an associate to work on again. And as I mentioned, I had a great experience at the firm. I ended up loving the practice of labor and employment law. I just found it was so human-centered. It involved just really issues that were constantly changing and evolving. I think we've really seen on a nationwide level over the past few years. The Me Too movement has really impacted employment law across states, especially now where I am learning in California, a really interesting place to be practicing and learning labor and employment law. And ultimately, it became my goal to go back to that firm and be a labor and employment attorney, which is something I will now do about a year from now. After I graduate law school and take the bar, I will go back to the firm's Los Angeles office and begin as an associate in their labor and employment group. So, what happened as just kind of me wanting to get more experience and learn more about a different setting of the legal practice, serendipitously just turned into like a really great thing that will become my career. I was lucky to have this experience where I went to a firm and loved it, and now want to spend my career working there. And so I cannot recommend enough taking some time to work and make sure it's really what you want. Hannah did a different path that she'll talk about, and like her path is equally as valid. And trust me, there are times when I wish I was already an attorney. Like I look at Hannah and I'm like, Hannah's working, she's making money. I am so jealous. I am here. I'm 28 and in a mountain of student debt. I'm ready to be out of school and just start working. But at the end of the day, that experience was very important to me to get some concrete experience under my belt to cement that it was what I wanted to do and that I wanted to make this leap. And I also just got, some good experience and exposure to legal concepts and terms that helped me in my first year of law school be a little less intimidated and feel a little bit more comfortable with certain classes I was taking. So yeah, that's my story. And if anybody's interested in being a paralegal or like wants to talk more about that, I'm happy to leave my email with you guys so that you can reach out to me and ask me any questions you might have about that specifically.
And Hannah, your experience was completely different. You went directly from college to law school. So let me start with a kind of a tough question for you. Did you feel a little burned out when you first started your first month at law school after having achieved a lot at Tufts?
I actually did not, but I think that was largely a virtue of my senior spring at Tufts. I only had one class left to finish my major, both majors. So I went part-time and really didn't do much work senior spring. So I was sort of ready to restart in the fall. And I will say that Morgan's path is a little more typical, I think, not necessarily paralegal, but taking a few years off and working. The biggest factor for me in not doing that was unlike Morgan, I was pretty confident that I wanted to go to law school. And I realized that I couldn't possibly work and save enough money to cover tuition no matter what. And that I was going to be buried in loans when I came out, whether I put that off for 2 or 3 years or not. So it was the right fit for me, and it might be for you, but it's not the most typical path. I'll say in my section of about 85 first-year law students, only 4 of us had come straight through. So there are definitely benefits, like Morgan mentioned. If you work in the legal field, you'll get some exposure to a certain area of law, or maybe even feel more comfortable in your classes. But I had the advantage of still knowing how to study, and not some of my classmates who had taken more time off weren't used to the academic schedule and sort of the freedom that they had in scheduling their studying around life when they had just been working sort of 9 to 5.
Let me move on to the application process. It's kind of a pain in the neck, I would imagine. Can you tell us any advice that you'd share with Tufts students about the application process to law school, either of you?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in first if that's all right. I have a couple of pieces of Tufts specific advice. The first of which is the Academic Resource Center, at least when I was there. So in the fall of 2014, my senior fall was when I started studying for the LSAT and working on applications, again, because I knew I was going straight through. And so the Academic Resource Center at Tufts had writing fellows, and some of those writing fellows specialized in helping with personal statements. So I benefited enormously from the help of a writing fellow named Emma, who worked with other students who were preparing their personal essays to go to graduate school. So that's a resource that's available to you and free, and you should definitely make the most of it. I also highly recommend having just as many people as possible read your personal statement, get all the input you can. I think at the time, Morgan definitely read it, Judge read it, other interns I worked with read it. Just getting a ton of feedback is really important. The LSAT is also very important. You need to study for that, like it's a full-time job. So if that's not something you can manage while taking your senior classes, then maybe you should think about taking some time off, as Morgan did and many others do. I didn't study enough for the LSAT, and I'll say that right up front. And that mattered, right? But when law schools are looking at you, the two most important things are GPA and LSAT score. So I had a comparatively high GPA and a lower LSAT score that sort of evened me out and kept me competitive. But if you're sort of teetering on a median GPA for a school, it's even more important to do well on the LSAT. And that's just sort of the reality of how it goes. Obviously, the personal statement can help you, but those two factors are the most important, and you want to give them the time they deserve when you're looking to apply. In terms of where to apply, I think you want to go as broad as possible. It's like college in the sense that, you might narrow it geographically, and you want to have maybe a couple reach schools, some that you're pretty sure your median numbers align with, and then maybe a few safeties. You also, I think, want to don't just look at the rankings of schools, right? Because some schools might be lower in the rankings, but have a specialty or an area of law that they're really well known for. An example, I think the University of New Hampshire School of Law is ranked probably somewhere in the 70s in the US News and World Report, but they have a world-renowned IP practice. Similarly, I think the geographic market is important. A ton of Boston lawyers went to Suffolk, which again isn't ranked as high, but has huge network effects for you if you're looking to work long-term in Boston. So those kind of things are all important considerations. And of course, so is the cost. And my decision ultimately came down to being between BU and BC. And BU ultimately offered more money in scholarships. And so that was why I went there. So you can use all of those factors, and I think that'll help sort of carve your path in which school to go to.
Yeah, I will totally echo everything that Hannah says and add a few things. So as I mentioned, or actually as Judge mentioned, I'm a California girl who came east for college, but my whole family's from the Northeast. I live here in the summers growing up. I'm back in the Northeast now. So I was always very pulled between East and West Coast. And I probably applied to way more schools than the average person would, because I was at that time still very torn between whether I wanted to stay in the Northeast, I love Boston, or whether I wanted to return home to California. And so that was a tough thing for me to think about and decide, and took a lot of conversations with loved ones and friends and family to really figure out where I fell on that, but also knowing that, nothing is forever. But when you are going to a school, especially when you're going to a school that's not like top 10 and will send you anywhere, it is important to consider geographic limitations and where schools have certain pull, and, where you might want to practice law afterwards. A few more things. I totally echo what Hannah said about GPA and LSAT. It's unfortunate that those numbers matter so much. It stinks, but it is how the law school application process works. And it's not only important for where you go to school, but also how much money a school might offer you in like scholarship to try and get you to come to their school. So a couple points higher on the LSAT could end up being $20,000 more a year in scholarship. And that really makes a difference when you're taking out these amounts of loans. And it really makes a difference if you don't know where your legal career is going to take you. One piece of advice I've always been given just across the board from attorneys in all different practices is like, don't worry about the loans. Like, if you want to be a lawyer, do what you got to do, and that will work itself out later, because there are so many different ways to repay loans, whether you go into private practice or whether you go into government practice or public interest. Another thing I would caution people to consider is the rankings only matter so much depending on what you want to do. If you want to go into quintessential big law practice or a high stakes litigation boutique, or if you want to clerk like Hannah did, it is important to go to a highly ranked school. And I would recommend you go, honestly, as highly ranked as you can, if it's a school that you like. However, my school is actually really well known for public interest work. It's a pretty new law school. It's only like 12 years old, and was built by legal professionals to try and create a school that catered towards students who are interested in public interest work. And So we get a lot of students who want to go be lawyers at community aid organizations, the ACLU, and just so many different local legal services groups. And when that's what you're looking to do, you don't necessarily, I've been told that you don't necessarily need to worry about school rank as much. It's more the connections you make while at school, the work experience you get doing pro bono work and externships for those organizations that are often located in your community, and just kind of getting that hands-on on the ground work experience while you're there and making those connections is more important than going to a school that's ranked number 3 in the country. So those are all important things to consider. And I know it's really hard to know at this point in your legal career, like what you want to do. But if you do have a sense, those are important considerations to take into account. And I think I had one other thing to say, but I totally don't remember what it was. But you guys will be great. And oh, I do. Okay, this was it. I remember as I had taken a few years and I had no idea. I did study for the LSAT on top of working a job where I was working like at least 60 hours a week. And that was tough. And I wish I'd studied more too. I took advantage, because I had an income at the time, I paid to take an online course to help me through studying for the LSAT. I don't know if I regret it or not, because my LSAT score wasn't like great, but you know what, we're still here. And I ended up, you know, in the right place. So everything happens for a reason. But I was surprised at how similar applying to law school felt like applying to college. There really is, with a few exceptions, a centralized system where your scores are sent and you upload your personal statements and any other side essays that need to be written. And I would want to let everybody know that it costs money to apply to law school, first of all, which stinks. Just application fees are a racket, but they add up. But there are fee waivers. And so schools that, you know, especially those schools that might be right in your wheelhouse or are more of a safety school for you, seek out fee waivers. Many schools just like straight up email them out. I wish I remembered more about how that worked, but I just remember, you know, paying attention to those, taking advantage of as many of those as possible, because that'll save you, you know, $100 an application. And when you are struggling to decide which coast you want to go to school on and you're applying everywhere on both sides, the fees add up. And so it's important to just keep an eye out for those, and that'll help where it can.
Now that you've both been in law school, have you heard of other law schools that are what I would call hidden gems? You know, known for certain things, their reputations may not be as strong nationally according to the so-called U.S. News and World Report, but you know that they're very, very fine law schools in any part of the country. Anything that come to your mind?
Nothing really comes to mind, but I would go back to Hannah's point about geographically, some schools that might not be ranked super high on the U.S. News and World Report, like Suffolk, do really well in cities because of just the strength of their network and how well regarded they are in areas like specifically Boston. And I think if you have a certain geographic area you want to be in, one way you could kind of find that out is just, you know, start looking up lawyers in the area, whether they're at firms or working as DAs or public defenders or at legal services organizations, and see where they went to school. And you'll start seeing a lot of the same names, and maybe you'll see a school that's, you know, more regionally strong than its U.S. News and World Report ranking would suggest.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. I would put in a plug for Northeastern just because of they do the co-op program the same way that they do with their undergraduates. And so if you end up with, you know, 4 co-ops, you have that much more work experience than any other law graduate coming out and looking for legal work. And you might well have made connections at those internships or co-ops where you'll be offered a job before you take the bar. And that's a pretty nice position to be in that really doesn't happen much outside of the big law realm.
Or Fordham in New York. I mean, it's still ranked pretty highly and it's a good school. I feel like it's in the 30s, but Fordham, if New York City is where you want to be, and like maybe NYU and Columbia are a little out of reach, Fordham does really well in New York.
Great. 2 quick questions. I'm sorry.
Sorry. One more thing you can look at too, and this, I sort of got fortunate with actually both Tufts and BU in this respect, but if you look at a school that's sort of like 30s or 20s, but also look at their recent growth. right? Because even since Morgan and I went to Tufts, it's just shooting up nationally, and that makes us look good, even though it wasn't quite as rigorous when we applied as when you guys did. And I had the same thing happen at BU. It was, I think, 27, 28, 29 when I got in. And then last year it was up to 20. And so people now are like, oh, you went to a top 20 school. And really I didn't, but they think so. So that works out nicely. So look at recent growth is a good measure to consider as well.
Two quick questions, and then we'll go on to the law school experience. Did you visit any law schools before you actually applied to them? And second question, are there any law schools anymore that conduct a personal interview that actually counts in the admissions process?
I'll take the second one first. I did not have any interviews. I don't think that means it doesn't happen. I know other people who did. I think my impression at BU was that was sort of more of an offering if you were on the cusp of getting in or not. So I think it can maybe serve as a tiebreaker for them. I just didn't happen to have that situation. I did visit 3 or 4 of the law schools I was most interested in attending, and that actually made the decision harder because I liked the people at all of them, and they do a really good job, obviously, on these recruiting visits to really sell you on the best points of their law school. So I'll use Northeastern as an example again. They were sort of my backup safety school, but after going there and learning more about their co-op program, I was pretty sold on that for a little while.
There we go.
Yeah, I also don't recall ever being offered any interviews or being expected to be offered any interviews. I'm sure, like Hannah said, it does happen, but that was not part of my process, and I don't even remember it being something that was on my mind at the time. Although I would have probably loved that, honestly. If you do get an opportunity for an interview anywhere, I would generally 10 out of 10 recommend you take that, especially if you are, really well spoken and captivating in person, because charm works. As for visiting schools, when I did not visit any before applying, the only ones I visited 2. And I planned to visit more, but during my decision-making process, as I was looking into the schools I'd gotten into and weighing certain considerations, my decision actually came down to UC Irvine, Boston College, and the University of Colorado Boulder. And schools will offer an admitted students weekend or 2 where you can come visit the school, meet current students and faculty, maybe sit in on a mock lecture, tour the facilities. And I ended up not doing that at BC because their money offering wasn't enough. But I did that at Colorado and UC Irvine. And again, like Hannah said, like Colorado was my Northeastern. It was kind of the safety school that I ended up really loving. As I mentioned, I am an avid skier and hiker, and I just love being outside. And the thought of living in Boulder, Colorado was very enticing to me. And it was a tough decision because I loved the school, I loved the surroundings, I loved Denver and Boulder. And then I visited UC Irvine, and having grown up in Los Angeles, Irvine is about 45 minutes south. I wasn't as inspired by the area as much, but I could tell I really loved all the faculty I met. I loved the dean that spoke. I wanted to be wherever she was. And I could tell that the students were really genuinely happy there, although they were at Boulder too, I will say. And so that was a really tough decision for me to make. And I had to ultimately remind myself that I'm going to law school to be a lawyer and not to be a skier who takes law classes on the side. And it was tough, but I made the right choice. And I found that visiting really helped because I was able to gauge the student body. And that was a big component for me. And I was glad to see that students in both of my top places that I was thinking of going to seemed genuinely happy and friendly and nice. And I found that to be just so true in coming to UC Irvine. I think the student body is incredible and just very congenial and not competitive, and just genuinely happy to be there and make friends and make connections. And I don't do well in competitive places. I'm not a competitive person. And so that really sealed the deal for me, is once I saw that and saw it as a place that, even if I didn't love Irvine as a town or Orange County as a place, I saw that a place where I was going to fit into the student body. And it's ended up being so true. I've made the best friends of my life. So no regrets there.
Two questions about law school, and then I'm going to open it up to the students to on Zoom. We've got 31 folks on Zoom and a few people who are brave souls in front of us here. Anything about the law school experience that surprised you? And secondly, did you ever feel discouraged by the workload in the first year or the second year?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. So this one sounds kind of dumb, but when I was thinking about these questions, I was surprised by how hard law school was. And that might have been the naivete of going straight through. And that is a big reason that people sometimes recommend taking time off. So the first semester does hit you pretty hard. It's a lot of work, and they say treat it like a full-time job, but I think in some ways it's more than that, especially depending on your study habits or just how you absorb information. And it was absolutely discouraging. Both the first semester and second year was difficult in a different way, because I had sort of figured out how to study and how to do academically at that point. But then on top of that, you have journal work and clinic work and sort of these outside obligations that are in some ways more important than school, because they have deadlines before a final. So you keep pushing off your finals review because it turns out you have a trial scheduled or a motion to suppress, or you have a journal deadline. And so learning to sort of rebalance first year, I think, is just learning how to do well academically, because it's hard. It's much harder than college. And so once you finally sort of get that going and you feel like you get it at the end of the spring of the first year, then in the second year, that's only one piece of what you're expected to do. And that takes an adjustment as well. I will say that the biggest thing that drove my academic success was, I don't know if you guys are familiar with outlining, but that's how law students prepare for final exams. So you want to get outlines from students who have recently had your professor for that subject, but it's really, really important to make your own outline. So I did much better in the spring when I, one, made my own outlines, didn't copy and paste from other people's, and two, started earlier. They had recommended starting around Halloween or something in the fall, and I didn't do that. I couldn't keep up with my reading and do that, but it was important. And the other thing that really increased my grades was taking practice exams. Your professors will put them online from the library, or you can get them from older students, or you can do practice questions from these books called Examples and Explanations, and they have them from every subject. And my grades honestly went from very average to way above average. And that was huge. And if I had done that and known those things the first semester, I would have been way at the top of my class if I had figured that out sooner. So that's a piece of advice I would definitely share.
I have been surprised similarly with Hannah. I came in knowing it was going to be hard, and I'd kind of prepared myself mentally that 1L was going to be the hardest year of my life, but I was just going to get through it. And it was, well, maybe not the hardest year of my life, but it was very hard, and so all consuming. But I got through it. And then, much like Hannah, I was surprised at how it didn't get easier. I started caring less about certain things that had occupied a lot of my time 1L, such as completing all of the readings. But that time that I would have spent finishing every last word on the page was suddenly completely overtaken by things like being an executive editor, a staff editor, and now an executive editor on our law review, and being a member of a clinic. I am now in my third semester of our school's civil rights litigation clinic. And in my first semester of that, my professor, who's a longtime civil rights litigator in LA, looked at me and 3 other 2Ls and was like, hey, you guys want to write an opposition to a petition for certiorari in the Supreme Court? And we were like, yes. And then he was like, okay, go write it. And we were like, wait, what? And so suddenly, I'm worried about passing evidence, but I'm also worried about being the reason that these former child slaves in the Ivory Coast don't get relief because the Supreme Court is going to deny their case or grant the corporation's case in opposition. And suddenly you're worried about grades and being in school, but you're also dealing with these deadlines that are much more real, in that they're just not meeting them would have much more tangible bad effects. There's a word I'm looking for that's just escaping me right now, but and so that's tough. So that was very surprising. Here I am in my finishing my fall semester of 3L year, and everyone's like, 3L's chill, and it should be chill. Grades, I'm not too worried about grades anymore, but I'm so busy. And I'm still working on that Supreme Court case that has been my life for like the past year, but also trying to manage everything else, like law review and classes and mentoring students and just like sleeping. But I will also say that there have been great things. I was surprised at how good of friends I've made. I kind of went into law school expecting everybody to be hyper competitive and intense, and I found that to not be the case. And I've made some great friendships. There's something to be said for friendships that come out of going through something like that together. So that's been wonderful. And it overall has been a very good experience. But, when I finished 1L, I was like, okay, that's it. We're done. Like we can hang out and chill now. And like, that is just so not the case. I'm so tired, but you get through it. It prepares you well for practice.
Okay. I know that there's been a recurring question in our classes. What kinds of careers, and I'll just end with this question before I throw it open. What kind of lawyering is out there to do? I have spoken about being a trial lawyer ad nauseum, as if that's the only thing, A, I know what to do, how to do, and B, that's the only chosen career path that these students could possibly pursue. I obviously want them all to be trial lawyers. I think they may have a different viewpoint of life. So tell us, what are the different areas that you can get into?
Sure. I'll start with putting in a plug for clerking, actually, which isn't a career path, but is usually a term limited position for a year or two. And I did 2 of those clerkships. And I think almost no matter what kind of law, which we'll talk about in a second, no matter what kind of career you want to have, I think a clerkship can be beneficial to you. I did both of mine in appellate courts, but you can do them in trial courts. You can do it in a specialty specific court, like the probate court. So if you know that you want to be a wills, trust, and estates lawyer someday, that would be a really good place to clerk. And pretty much no matter what kind of law, I say it's important for you because you learn how judges think, you learn how to write better, you learn how to research better, and you do it on the government's dime. So you're not making a lot of money, but you have a lot of time to do your project. And there's something very satisfying about working for a judge where the goal is to get it right, as opposed to representing a client where maybe you're not right on the law and the facts aren't on your side sometimes. So there's the objective piece is nice and I think gives you just a skill set that translates really well to any kind of practice. Like Judge Curran, I only think that being a trial lawyer is interesting, but a lot of my classmates went the corporate route. So as far as I can tell, they're all at big law firms, reviewing tons of documents, working on contracts for big companies, merging, buying and selling, working on private equity. There's a lot of that to be done. And even within being a trial lawyer, there are a ton of things you can do and specialize in. Some lawyers do malpractice cases. And within that, even you have medical malpractice and legal malpractice and construction malpractice. You can be an appellate lawyer and then you'll get any type of cases, but maybe you specialize in writing briefs and arguing, not in the trial setting, but you're still going to court. I find that particularly interesting. So I think the options you can have as a lawyer are almost limitless. I mentioned wills, trusts, and estates. There's also family law, immigration law. So you can find something interesting to do pretty much no matter what your background is. And that ties back into what I said about choosing a major. It almost doesn't matter because you'll find an area of the law that's interesting to you that may or may not relate to your major, but if it does, you might find that particularly interesting. I like criminal law the best. And that did tie in some interesting ways. I took a class my senior fall at Tufts called Psychology and the Law. And so that tied in nicely with my psych major, but it also got me really jazzed about going to law school.
I think that's another thing that surprised me in law school is learning how many different ways and areas and practices, how many different types of lawyers there are, how many different ways you can be a lawyer. The possibilities are truly endless. There are so many different types of law, like the ones Hannah just mentioned, and then you can take those types of laws and practice them in so many different settings. You can be a trial lawyer, you can do more counseling work where you're working with clients and advising them. You can do work for the government, you can work in the city's attorney's office or as a public defender or district attorney. You can even take a law degree and go into politics and work, for the legislature and be a chief of staff or chief of policy things or like whatever else they do. You can go into legal services and fight for civil rights and advocate for education reform. You can become a lobbyist. Like there are so many different ways to use a law degree. And I think that's incredible. I fell in love with trial lawyering through my internship with Judge Curran, and I still plan on following a path that will stay close to litigation, which is, the process by which you are representing clients in cases before courts. But I also have realized that I'm kind of a know-it-all, and I thrive in kind of being a know-it-all. And I kind of love when people ask me questions and I know the answer. And that's part of what drew me to employment laws. I also, in addition to, wanting to be able to occasionally be in court and liking the comfort of following the court litigation process, I like when people ask me questions, and I like the idea of clients coming to me and saying, how do we comply with this new wage and hour law? How do we comply with this new law that just passed? And being able to either say like, this is how you do it, or hold on, let me get back to you. And then going back and saying, this is how you do it. And also like, this is how you should do it to be a great employer. So that kind of stuff excites me. And I'm going to kind of have a mixture of both litigation work as well as general advising and counseling work. And it's even going to involve some corporate work, which I understand just to mean like working on contracts all the time. I honestly don't know what corporate lawyers do. But it's exciting. And I have friends who are going on the criminal path and the public interest path and practicing environmental law and patent law. And it cannot be emphasized enough how many different areas of law there are. And then also when you look at those areas, how many different arenas there are that you can practice that law in differently. That's crazy.
Thank you. And Hannah, just as a last postscript to what you were speaking about, could you tell us in just a sentence or two about that case that you had when you first came on board at Kellogg Hansen, and you were second chair in the trial before an international entity?
Sure. Yeah, so I joined the firm I'm at now on October 13th. And that day I got assigned to 3 matters. We call them matters instead of cases for whatever reason. And I got put on a trial team that was probably 6 partners and 4 or 5 associates. And they were to begin a trial before the International Trade Commission the following week. And as you can imagine, trial prep is absolutely insane. So I got handed research projects right away, and I helped source things for cross-examinations that were happening the very next day, and just sort of jumped right in.
Well, that's pretty dramatic. All right. Thank you very much, both of you. Now, questions from Zoom participants and in-person participants.
I had a question. So how important, so I know Hannah said that only 2 of the people in your section had come straight from undergrad. I was just wondering, like, how important is it or how much does it benefit you in the application process to have sort of like something else that you've done before that? Like, I know a lot of people go in with an MBA, or even I know there are PhD students that pursue law school later on. I'm personally thinking about doing an MPH, which is like a master's in public health, beforehand. So I just wonder, like, how useful is that when applying, and does that sort of strengthen your application, or does it not matter if you have the right numbers in terms of GPA?
I think that would really help. I think numbers are most important when you're going straight through, because the numbers are the only thing that you have that really speak to you. When you have another advanced degree, it really helps tell the story of who you are and why you are pursuing a career as a lawyer, or a lawyer / master of public health, or a lawyer / MBA, MD, all those all those different degrees, and people do it all. So I think that really will help in application, whether, you know, it's just because it helps tell your story, and, you know, schools want to see students who are not only interesting and bring diverse perspectives and backgrounds, which can come from any different way, but including work experience or other advanced degrees in education, but also that you have kind of a path and you know why you want to be a lawyer. I think it's important for them to see that, and I think that would definitely help.
I have a question. Oh,
No, go ahead.
both of you guys mentioned working on your law review. And I was wondering how you guys got into that, and kind of like how important that is in law school.
Sure. So the way it works at BU, and my understanding is this is a pretty universal experience, but we walked out of our last final and we were handed a 250-page packet called the writing competition. I think now it's probably electronic, but half of it was writing a 10-page essay on a prompt that they had given. And so that was a legal memo, and that was graded by all the current members of the journals. And then the other half was sort of really technical citation pieces. And so they gave us all these footnotes that were a citation disaster, and we had to fix them, which sounds pretty easy, but the whole thing took an entire week. And you submitted that, and they graded it, and they look at that. Some journals will look at your grades as well. The law review at BU, the top 3 students GPA-wise in each section can grade on, so their performance on the writing competition doesn't matter. The catch is, of course, that they don't know that they've graded on at the time, so they have to put a good faith effort into the writing competition. And so based on that, then the law review gets to select whoever they want as sort of the most prestigious journal, and then the other journals can select from there as you rank them or sort of offer yourself up. In terms of doing it, I think it's an extremely important experience for jobs, again, depending on what you want to do. So if you want to have a clerkship after law school, I think it's pretty much essential. And then just in terms of practical skills, I would say it's the thing from law school that was the most translatable to practice. Like the partners at my firm expect me to spot when a comma is italicized that shouldn't be. That's on me. And so I learned that from law review, and that's not something you're going to pick up in a doctrinal class about torts where you just learn the law in general. So I think journal is really valuable. It's also very time consuming. It's like having another class, but I think it's one of the best things you can do. It's also one of the places that Morgan talked about that you make really good friends, because you meet even more like-minded people who have sort of elected to undergo this suffering together. And there's nothing like sharing that camaraderie to build a friendship. And I think that's just sort of a really important place to find where you belong.
Yeah, this was an area where actually my paralegal experience really benefited me. Much like you guys probably use, I think, like MPA style for citations and bibliographies and stuff in academic work. The legal world uses something called the Blue Book, which is just like literally a thick book with a blue cover. And it's just a different way of formatting citations. And that was something I became very well versed in as a paralegal, and spent 3 years blue booking actual court briefs. And so when it came to do the write-on, I was sailing, I was chilling. It wasn't as bad of an experience for me because I had been blue booking for, at that point, like 4 years. And so I was able to fly through it. And so it ended up really working in my favor because, I ended up kind of loving law review because it was something that I felt I could do because I had exposure to it and it was something I was comfortable at. And I've chosen to now become like an executive editor on the law review, which just means like 10 times the amount of work. But it's been great because I have this experience. I'm very confident in my editing skills, and it's, a good thing to have on my resume, but also something I enjoy doing. And I will echo what Hannah said. Law review is very important for certain jobs. It's very important for clerking. It's definitely something big law firms like to see participation in. But on the contrary, Coastkeeper, my local water-based environmental legal advocacy group, like they don't give a damn about law review. So, it can be very important depending on what you want to do, but not making it on is not the end of the world if it's, especially if you're not heading for big law or clerking. And also my admission or like our application process was very similar, but minus the grades thing. We didn't have that.
Morgan, I gotta interrupt. Gia has to do some work, but Gia, come on in. Gia has a question for you, and she's got a time constraint. That's why I wanted to put her in front.
Go for it.
Okay. Or, so I was just wondering if you ever encounter any careers in the law that might not actually involve law school? Like, is that something you've ever come across, or everybody across the board has a law degree and passed the bar?
You
Or-
can definitely like work in the court system. I know like being a social worker, you might come into contact with the courts, or something I was just thinking, you have like politics and policy work, you know, if you want to work for a state or federal representative or senator, you can do work that will involve crafting and passing laws. And I don't think you necessarily need a law degree for that.
I think the best example too is being a paralegal.
Yeah, you don't need a law degree to be a paralegal. And I felt, you know, if I'd continued in the role as a paralegal, which plenty of people do, they just mean to go to law school after and they keep being paralegals. You can really do a lot of hands-on work as long as you're supervised by an attorney. But I was personally involved in I even did some legal research. I was helping craft discovery responses and answers. And as long as, you know, I was supervised by an attorney, it was okay for me to be doing that. And that's definitely something you can do without a law degree.
I know Judy has other questions. Could I just ask if it would be possible, I know Morgan said, is it possible to transmit your email addresses if they have personal questions? A lot of them are.
Yeah, of course. For sure.
I'm putting mine in the chat right now.
Okay,
I don't know how to do that because I'm using my phone, but Judge Curran has it and is welcome to give it out.
if it's okay with you, that's all.
Yeah, but truly, if you guys have any questions, I'm always happy to talk over email or Zoom again. I like to talk.
From Zoom.
Happy to help.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions at all?
There's one in the chat.
Okay.
What kinds of different paths would you recommend pursuing in the years between undergrad and law school, working for a firm, masters, etc.? I personally would not recommend any one particular path. There's no one right answer. You know, I would say actually do something you're passionate about, whatever it is. I know people who were musicians and dancers, artists, and bartenders. Just do something you're passionate about where you can gain some sort of tangible skills, at least something you can talk about on applications, regardless of what that is or how legal or not legal it is. But definitely like find something that interests you and do that. You definitely do not need to work in the legal field. You probably become more interesting if you actually apply with work experience that isn't in the legal field, that still makes you want to be a lawyer. There truly is no one right answer, but do something you enjoy. That's truly I know it sounds cheesy, but that's really the only right answer.
That's true. It's true. Well, thank you very much for your time. You've been very, very generous. I know it's your downtime from school, and the last thing you want to do is talk about law school. But we appreciate it on behalf of the 32 or 3 students, 35 students or so. You've been wonderful, and we appreciate it. And I will send them your email addresses. Some of them are shy, some of the students are shy, but nevertheless, they're interested in following up, I know. Thank you very much. And we'll put
Thank you. And definitely feel free to reach out.
Yeah, for sure. Good luck, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, good luck.